Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Greater Boston Business and Professional Chapter's salute to Sam Blumenfeld. I'm going to make some comments about Sam, and then we're going to have Chuck Morse, and then John McManus, and Alex Newman, who has co-authored a book with Sam, Crimes of the Educators, comment on his book. Sam is, as we all know, in very poor health, but he actually asked me to have a little tribute to him at this meeting. And he was a member of our luncheon gathering for many, many years, a friend of all of us, and an inspiration. And I know one time I was riding with Sam, as I did on many occasions, and he thought, you know, is he making a difference? You know, he said, well, the schools are worse. Anyone paying attention? I said, Sam, you've impacted 3 generations and many to come. So of course, you've had a profound impact on this country, not just this country, but other parts of the world as well. So I want to give a quick little biographical sketch. Sam will be 89 years of age in a few days. 1926, born in New York. His parents were immigrants from Poland, Polish Jews. Sam was a World War II veteran. You see here a picture of Sam when he had hair, wavy hair. He served in Italy. He went to, in fact, I've known him for many years, and I knew he was a World War II veteran, but I didn't know what he did until recently. He was in artillery. You don't picture Sam Blumenfeld, pulling the lanyard, right? Now, I was in artillery, but I wasn't in World War II, and I didn't have to shoot at any live targets. But Sam was in the Po Valley, and it was from March until the end of World War II. And he's written a lot of poetry, by the way. And one of the things I found in his collection was a poem he wrote about escorting the German POWs. And and I don't remember how the poem went, but he said that one of the POWs was looking sick, and he offered him his biscuit, and the German took the biscuit and smiled, but Sam looked away. So he was showing his humanity without being a friend of the enemy, I guess. So he ended up going to City College in New York, and he traveled abroad, and he actually France. He spoke several languages. When he was in Italy during World War II, he befriended an Italian family. He went back like 10 years later or so to visit with them. He was an editor at Grosset and Dunlop. Some of you remember the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. It was probably Sam doing some of that editing. And it was then when a friend of his, an attorney from New York City, Washburn, I think his first name, Wendell Washburn, he asked Sam if he would be part of his literacy. Watson Washburn. Excuse me, I want to get that name correct, because that man was the one that put Sam on the straight and narrow in this issue. He had a literacy foundation, and he said, will you be part of this? And Sam said, why? He says, because children don't know aren't being taught how to read. Now, what are you talking about? Reading is a simple thing to do. And he said, what you need to do is get a copy of this book, and this was actually Sam's book, I think the one that he got, Why Johnny Can't Read by Rudolph Fleisch. This was published in the early 50s, and this is the book that inspired Sam. He actually had a correspondence with him, which we're going to make available. He asked me I have the letters. So this motivated Sam. He ended up working for the John Birch Society in the early 60s. He was an editor for the American Opinion magazine, not editor, but writer, and did some editing there. I think he wrote the foreword to Proofs of a Conspiracy, the one that American Opinion, Western Islands published. Then he went off on his own, and he has written about 15 books. It's hard to keep track of all the things he's written. I have a lot of the collection here. But I knew he wrote for Boston Magazine, but I wasn't quite sure. I thought it was just a few articles, but he actually did some court reporting. And I have a magazine. That's not a picture of Sam, by the way. Picture of looks like a politician. This is one of Sam's writings here, and he wrote for Reason magazine and many other magazines. And by the way, I have a lot of his writings in various conditions, from new to secondhand, over on the table here. Those in his newsletter. He had a monthly newsletter for about 15 years. All of that is available online in PDF format. But it's just a donation only, and donations will be in Sam's honor. Sam's first book was How to Start Your Own Private School. It's out of print on Amazon. It's selling for about $40 to $50. And his last book, and Sam said this was his swan song. This is before he was diagnosed with leukemia. Crimes of the Educators, which he co-authored with Alex Newman, who'll be talking about a little bit later. I'm not going to review all of the books, but the NEA Trojan Horse in American Education was one of the most important as far as exposing the history. And I believe Sam was one of the first to expose the conspiratorial aspects of education. Many of us are well versed on the political aspects of this conspiracy, the economic aspects, but Sam went into the educational aspect. And you would think that would be the first place to go, wouldn't it? The children? Of course. It makes sense. Yeah. How to Tutor was an important book too. This is before the as the modern homeschool was being launched back in the 70s. And I would say, I think Chuck calls him the godfather of the homeschool movement. I think that's a good term. Definitely a pioneer of the modern homeschool movement. A man that a lot of people may not know who he is, but they've been influenced by him because they've been learned how to read by phonics. I think probably the book that's going to be known for generations to come, as important as all these other books is this simple Alpha-Phonics, Blumenfeld's Alpha-Phonics. Yep. All 5 of my children learned how to read. And Sam would say, you don't need puppets popping out of trash cans to learn how to read, right? You don't need a bunch of pictures. Well, he had a great sense of humor. I mean, he was just a so funny guy. I would drive around. I'd pick him up at his condo in Waltham, and we'd go to Vermont for speeches or Maine. And having him in my passenger seat was like having a professor. You know, it was. I wish I could get college credits because I'd get a PhD in Sam Blumenthology, right? Wow. But this is, and then he put together something called the Alpha-Phonics kit, which I'm going to pull up. And I think the best picture to remember Sam is a picture right here. Teaching this, I don't know, maybe these children are probably in their 30s now, I don't really know. But this is Sam, this is the picture that Sam will be remembered by influencing the next generation and generations to come. Yeah, this is, and of course this is a little on the old side because they have, remember those things called cassettes? Yeah. Yeah, but we do have the instructions in CD format, so we'll probably be updating these. And but just some stories about Sam. I remember Sam was speaking in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and someone told me that he's going to be going to Albany in a week from Albany, New York, to speak. And this is the contact information. I give it to Sam, and it says a phone number. It says Adrian Villa. He says, "Oh, I guess I'll be staying at the Adrian Villa." You know, well, that's Adrian Villa right there. So, and anyway, yeah. So we had a lot of great times together. Speaking, and I remember just last year we had him speak in Troy, New Hampshire, and he wanted me to take him to a hotel in Westford where they were having the honor flight. The World War II veterans that were brought to Washington D.C. And we get there, and some of the veterans are spry as can be. They're ready to take on some people right now. But most of them were in wheelchairs, and Sam was very spry. And I said, "Gee, Sam, probably back, 1945, you probably weren't the biggest guy." He said, "But I think you could probably clean house today." And he said, "Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's what age would do to you, But Sam has bequeathed his writings to Bill McNally and I, and we took possession of 200 plus boxes. Wow. And I tell you, the stuff he hasn't published is amazing. Some of the unpublished manuscripts, some of them, we want to put as many up available in some type of PDF format online. He's given speeches, he's done hundreds of radio shows, and we've got about 2 boxes of cassettes from all these different shows and videos from his speeches. And what's amazing is that he said this stuff 30 years ago, and some people are fighting Common Core for the first time, and they're thinking that this stuff is brand new. You see, so and Sam was also very well known in the homeschool movement too. He attended many homeschool shows over the years, and was a fixture in all over the country. And he traveled at all 50 states, and he's actually traveled to China and a few other countries. And I think he was collaborating with a lady. I don't know if it was still. I think it kind of fell through. A Chinese lady to be able to teach phonics to Chinese people who were learning English. So at least they'll be able to teach the Chinese people come over here and teach our people how to read English properly. He lives in Brookline, Massachusetts, and he called Boston now, Brighton, right next door. He called me up, I don't know, 1993 and 92. He said, I have a radio show in Tufts University, and I want to interview you. And I thought he was just putting me on. I thought it was some prank. And he's talking about the communist takeover of China, and I said, this guy's pretty smart. This guy's too good to be true, so this must be a hoax. And then he invited me in studio to his station in Tufts, and I recommended him. I said, here's a couple of guests you should have, Sam Blumenfeld. And they became very good friends. So we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Hal. Very good friends. I mean, it's nice to see old friends today, and I mean, words can't describe the impact that Sam Blumenfeld's had on my life. I consider Sam to be my dearest friend, and the programs that we did together over a 20-year period are something that I'm the most proud of being involved in. I don't think there's anything that I'm more proud of. And fortunately, the last 2 or 3 years, and Sam has been my guest every week for all that time, and I've been at probably about a dozen radio stations. I have those archived. I have the podcasts, and they're there forever. I mean, and the quality of the broadcast, our conversation, it's incredible. I mean, just I've never had that. Probably will never have that again. The dialogue, our interaction, Sam's ability to distill an issue down to its most basic essence. We did some hysterical programs too. I mean, especially around the Clinton impeachment. I mean, we were both like rolling in the aisles. I mean, it was amazing. And we occasionally would have a third guest on. It has such an incredible synergy. I think it's some of the best radio ever. And I credit Sam with really the largest part of my own education, my own process. I mean, which is one of the things I've always loved about radio, is that it's allowed me to debug myself from all of this stuff that I've been taught in my life. I mean, as I rip apart the layers of the onion, radio's given me the opportunity to see more simple truths and the truth, as it were. And Sam Blumenfeld is someone that, I mean, it's his insights. I don't know anybody else who has that and who has the ability to convey it the way he does. He's just a national treasure that will not get the recognition because he's not on the right side of, quote, history. I remember when I was speaking at the State House against county government, to try to help save county government. Sam was there. He came to a lot of my events. And there was a statue on the lawn of the State House of Horace Mann dressed in a Roman toga with a tunic, right? And I'm like, that should be Sam Blumenfeld in the toga. Sam's like, I'd look good in a toga, but he should be, and he won't be because he's not. Neither would I, neither would most of us, because we're not sort of the official part of how we're to understand history in this society and life. But yet I do think and I do know that Sam's had a huge impact in spite of all of the obstacles. He's had an impact all over the world. His dedication to education and exposing what he always described quite accurately as a conspiracy to dumb down this country and to turn this country into a province of the world, to turn all of us into an international ant colony, is something that is it's unsurpassed, his ability to express this, to expose it, to identify how it's worked, how it's been put together all the way back. NEA Trojan Horse in American Education is I think, his magnum opus, along with his most recent book, which Alex wrote with him, which is also brilliant, and which really capsulizes his entire life's work. And I mean, it's just words can't describe the impact he's had on me, and I think that just through homeschooling alone, I think Sam has had a huge impact on the world. Homeschoolers coming up, I mean, he has certainly impacted my daughter, who learned how to read with Alpha-Phonics and who's now a student at Boston Latin and is doing very well. I've seen it, so therefore I've seen the actual effects of it. He gets down to the basic fact that the ability of children to think properly and cognitively is being deliberately interrupted, that these children are now teachers, that they are now unaware of what's going on, and he made people aware. And when he did make people aware, they got excited. I was fortunate enough just 3 weeks ago to have Sam come to do my TV program at Boston Neighborhood Network. Now they're all liberals, most of them African American. The producer of the program is an African American woman, a brilliant woman, very, very liberal, a 7-time Emmy Award winner. And Sam came in there, I picked him up, he felt fine. I hadn't seen him in a while, he looked a little more frail than I'd seen him before. He always does the show by phone, but he was at the top of his game. Thank God I have it on YouTube now. And when it was finished, the camera people, Barbara Barrow Murray, they were ready to carry him out on their shoulders. They were so thrilled because the information he was giving them is something that they had no idea about. It was almost like we had flown in from another planet. And it just resonated. They were like, yeah, that's what's happened to my son back when he was at school. That explains the dyslexia, the ADD, the lack of ability to think properly and cognitively. And so, therefore, I'm dedicated to continuing that legacy as long as I still have a breath and as long as I still have a few marbles clanking around. Because I think that it is one that needs to be continued with all of the energy that we can muster. And it was just last week that I was visiting Sam in Waltham. He's being very well cared for. And he kind of gave me my marching orders for what to do going forward, including he told me how he wanted me to write the last chapter of my new book with the title and what he wanted me to put in it. So thank God I did that, and I hope to see him again and continue to hear from him because, I mean, the man is at the top of his game even now. And I don't really know what else to say about it. I've just, other than that personally, words can't describe the impact he's had on me. Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to bring up John McManus, who was a longtime colleague of Sam Blumenfeld and the president of the John Birch Society. Jack?
Thank you. Thank you, Hal. I'll be brief, ladies and gentlemen. I got to know Sam Blumenfeld before he wrote a book that really impacted me. And that book, I don't know whether you got it on this pile or not, Is Public Education Necessary? Yeah. I remember reading that and telling my good friend, and a fellow named Lou Zizza, Terry and you'd all remember Lou. And Lou read the book, and he raved about it as well. And so we got a lot of people to try to read that. Is Public Education Necessary? I consider it one of the top 3 books to influence my thinking of all the books that I've read, or as I once told Robert Welch, all of the books you think I've read. So I'm very, very happy about getting to know Sam, and seeing him at the luncheons was always a pleasure. Some of you know, I'll make it publicly known now, that I'm hard at work trying to write a history of the John Birch Society. Everybody who hears that I'm working on it say, well, when are you going to have it finished? I want to read it, you know. I hope that's the case after it starts getting read by people. But in the course of my research, I came across something that Robert Welch republished in one of the early bulletins. It was a 6-page review of The Politician written by Sam Blumenfeld. And it's absolutely magnificent. I had opportunity to chat with Sam on the telephone via emails recently, and I told him that I had discovered that, and I said, do you remember that? He said, well, vaguely I remember it, but I don't remember what I said. I said, well, let me send you a copy of it. So I did. I printed it out and made six pages and sent it off to him. And he didn't get back to me about it, and I'm not going to bother him about it, but I hope he gets a chance to read it, because I know he'll enjoy it. It's so well done, as anything that Sam did was well done. So my favorite of Sam's book was Is Public Education Necessary? I have the NEA Trojan Horse in America. I have some other things that he's written. And it's always been a pleasure to be able to say that Sam Blumenfeld was a colleague and a friend. So
It's an honor to be here, and it was an absolute honor to get to know Sam and to work with him, and finally to meet him yesterday for the first time in person. As you guys know, his health is failing, but it was such a privilege and such an honor to meet him and shake his hand. And I'll tell you guys a few stories about our work together, and then I'll tell you guys a little bit about the book that we did. Let me get this up here on the big screen. Let's see, the slideshow. Okay, so we're not going to use the slideshow too much, but I have a few things on there I wanted to show you guys. So the story of our collaboration together on this book started, I think, early in 2014. I got a call from the publisher, and they said, hey, Sam Blumenfeld, I know you write for the New American also, and I know you're interested in education, and Sam Blumenfeld is working on a book. Would you be interested in working on it with him? And I said, of course, sign me up. What do I need to do? And so that's how it began. Then Sam and I got to speak. We compared notes on education and his views, and obviously, you know, he's been in this for 50 years, so he knew mountains more than I could ever even, you know, begin to conceive of. But we decided we would work together, and that was an absolutely amazing experience. Talking to Sam on the phone is like, it's hard to describe. It's like infinite wisdom just, you know, pouring out of the phone. He knows about everything. It's just unbelievable how sharp he was, and at his age, and how much he knew and how much he cared. I was just so touched by his motivations, and how you know, all of this, it was so selfless. He could have done all kinds of things, but he dedicated himself to trying to save this country by trying to save the minds of the children. And I can't think of a more noble pursuit than that. And so really it was such an honor to work with him. And then Alpha-Phonics too. Sam told me about it, and so I said, okay, I need to get a copy of that. And I used it to teach my oldest son how to read. He just turned 5 last month. And within 2 or 3 weeks, he could already read basic words using this. And he absolutely loves it. It's amazing. And when I told him I was going up to Boston to see Sam, he said, oh, Papa, tell Sam that I said thank you for the book and how much I love reading. Just totally on his own. And he made a little video for Sam to tell him thank you for writing the book and for teaching him how to read. And it was such a delight. And my son still loves it. He says, Papa, can we practice more reading? Can we practice more reading? He loves to do it. And there's none of the pictures, you know, the way that nowadays they teach how to read. It's got to be colorful and pictures and memorized words. There's none of that in here. But I know it works. I've proved that it works, and so have so many others. And you know, there's children all across this country who have benefited more than we'll ever know, thanks to the work of Dr. Blumenfeld, of Sam. And one more thing. Over the last few weeks since the book came out, I've been doing lots of radio interviews promoting the book. Sam has not been in great health, so most of the interviews and the talking and the TV things have been on me. And the response I've received, it has just been absolutely amazing. I get calls from radio hosts, and, oh my goodness, Sam has been such an inspiration. I got a call a few days ago from the head of the homeschool, so the National Home Education Research Institute, and he said he had seen Sam speak when he was still in college, and he asked him afterwards, Sam, what should I do? You know, what should I do with my life? I'm in university, I'm studying, and Sam told him, get into writing so you can influence people, and get into education, because those are the most important things. And that's what he did. And so Sam has touched more lives than I think any of us, or even he, will ever know or will ever understand. But it was such an honor and a pleasure to work with him. And finally to meet him yesterday. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about the book that we wrote, Crimes of the Educators, right here. There's some copies in the back, and if those run out, I have some with me as well. But basically what we start with is outlining crimes that the education establishment has perpetrated. And a lot of people, when they first hear that, crimes, they say, oh, you must be using hyperbole. Not at all. These are actual crimes. We list 6 specific prosecutable crimes that, you know, regular citizens would be prosecuted for if they were engaged in these kinds of activities, and rightfully so. And we point out that, you know, this is what's going on in the school. And then the subheader, how utopians are using government schools to destroy America's children. And again, people think, wow, that's really strong language, but it's actually absolutely 100% accurate. The children are being destroyed by the government schools, by the education establishment, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And this is a crime. It's a crime against our nation. It's a crime against these individuals and our families and everything that's good. And you know, we have to expose this. If the country is going to be saved, it begins with education. The John Birch Society understands that. Education is the way to fix these problems, and really it goes down to the very beginning. What they're doing in the government schools is preventing children from learning how to read. They're giving them lifelong reading disabilities. So even if they can kind of make their way through street signs, they're never going to enjoy reading enough to want to do it. So, you know, we can produce all the articles and all the papers and all the material in the world to educate people, but if they can't read it, it's not going to do any good. And so what Sam decided to dedicate his life to, I think, is maybe one of the most important things that anybody could ever do. And so talk a little bit about what's in the book. Obviously, I don't have much time, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything that's in the book. It's humongous. I mean, this is, you know, 50 years of Sam's research. We tried to condense it into a small book, which was, of course, very hard. We had to do a lot of cutting. We had to, you know, prioritize what was the most important. You know, what I want to do is explain, you know, where we came from and where we are, and then a little bit about what's in the book. And then I hope you guys will read the book. I hope if you enjoy it, if you think it's worthwhile, you'll share the information with others, because I think the information in this book has the capability of turning this country around. If people could understand what's going on with the education system, we could really turn the ship around. People could read, and once people can read, they can read their own history, they can read their Bibles, they can read everything that they want to read. They can acquire information and knowledge independently. They don't have to depend on the government schools. They don't have to depend on the establishment media that we know is not very truthful. And so really reading and education is key. So, you know, we start in early America. I'm just going to skip through a lot of this because we don't have time to go through it. But John Adams, he said, "A native of America who cannot read or write is as rare an appearance as a comet or an earthquake." So, you know, back then, people could read pretty well, right? Literacy was very widespread. Jefferson bragged that American farmers were the only ones in the world who read Homer. Today, if you ask people about Homer, Homer who? Huh? So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, clearly we've fallen a long way, right? If we, so, and you know, back then, everybody understood that you needed to be educated. Actually, here in Massachusetts, one of the first education laws ever passed here in these colonies, 1647, the Old Deluder Satan Act. And the idea was everybody needs to know how to read, because everybody needs to know the scriptures, because if they don't know the scriptures, Satan's going to come around here and get up to mischief and mislead our people. And so, you know, without a $1 trillion per year government school system, people still learned how to read, right? They learned from their parents, they learned from reverends, they learned from their communities, they learned from one-room schoolhouses where, you know, young kids up to, you know, 15, 16, whatever, would all study together. The older kids would help out with the younger kids, but we didn't have anything like what we have today. And again, it costs us more than $1 trillion a year nowadays in the United States on education. And so where are we today? How did we get from, you know, an American who can't read is as rare as an earthquake or a comet to a country where, according to the federal government, they did a literacy survey in 1993. 55% of Americans back then in 1993 could barely read. The situation is probably even worse now. So these 55% of Americans read in the worst two levels of reading. So clearly we've fallen a long way. We're spending more and more money on government education, but we're getting dumber and dumber and dumber, and now we're at the point where we're graduating millions of people who can't even read their high school diplomas, much less their constitutions or their Declaration of Independence. So clearly we have a very serious problem. And Ronald Reagan put together a commission, the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They said if a foreign power had done this to us, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. And what Sam and I argue is that we should view it as an act of war. Just because it wasn't a foreign power that imposed this disaster on us doesn't mean it's any less of an act of war. And if you read John Dewey's writings, you see that you know, his ultimate goal was transforming America, subverting our liberties, and turning America into a socialist utopia, and thereby overthrowing our system of government, our form of government, and our freedoms. And you know, if foreigners had done that, we would say that's an act of war. And why is it less an act of war? Because it was done by somebody who was born here. You know, dumbing down the population of a country is a crime of immense proportions. So lots of statistics today just showing what a disaster education has become today. We're going down, further down, we're spending more and more money, and things don't seem to get any better. Horace Mann, I think a lot of you guys know him because somebody referenced him and everybody laughed, but Horace Mann, he's kind of the guy who brought what we understand today as government schools into this country. He went to Prussia, and he thought they had a great system over there, mandatory, compulsory government education for everybody, students segregated by ages, and really one of the main purposes was to train children in obedience to the state and so on. So he came back here, imported this into Massachusetts, and traveled the country and promoted this across the country. And then the architecture was there when John Dewey came on the scene around the year 1900. John Dewey, all he had to do was seize control of this architecture and use it rather than, its original purpose, to educate people, to dumb people down. He thought education would be good for equalizing people, instilling obedience and authority, and so on and so forth. And he was very successful in getting this model promoted nationwide. As most of you, probably all of you know, one of Sam's biggest, I think, contributions to this world and to the field of education is his exposure, his shining the light on this whole controversy of whole word versus phonics. And I had heard about this, many years ago, but I didn't realize what a serious issue this was. This was just, for me, an arcane debate. Okay, whole word, phonics, who knows, who cares? But what Sam has done in this book and in some of his previous books is show that the importance of this is just monumental, because basically the whole word method is used because it's not a proper way of teaching people to read. It produces lifelong reading disabilities, it produces dyslexia, and now modern brain scans can even show this. We talk about some of the studies that have been done, neuroscientists have looked at this, and what they've shown is that children who learn how to read using phonics, Alpha-Phonics is an excellent way to do that, their brains work well. You can scan their brains, you can see that the left brain does what the left brain should do, the right brain does what the right brain should do, the connections between the two are seamless and they work perfectly. Then when you do the same kind of scan on a child who learned how to read using the whole word method, what you find is confusion, a lack of connections between the two hemispheres. One is trying to do the job of the other, and it's just all scrambled. And another thing that Sam has done is he's shown that this can actually be reversed. And I think that's really huge and hugely important, because this means that it's not a lost cause. Just because somebody was dumbed down in the government schools and taught to read the wrong way doesn't mean that it's a lost cause. Sam has actually helped people who learned how to read the wrong way learn how to read the correct way. And so it's a hard process, it's arduous, and it's actually, some of the people who have undergone it have described it as painful, because you're really rewiring your brain to learn how to read correctly. But once it's done, then suddenly a whole world opens up to people. They can read anything they want, they enjoy reading, and then the doors are open, the possibilities are endless. People can educate themselves, and obviously that is huge, and that's what we need in this country. We need people to educate themselves, or we're never going to get anywhere. And we can produce the materials, we can help them along the way, but people have to want to learn, and to do that they have to know how to read properly, and they have to enjoy reading. So let's see, we'll talk a little bit about John Dewey. We spend a good amount of time in the book talking about John Dewey. Essentially, he was a socialist and a humanist, and he was very proud of these things. It's not some kind of secret. His views were well known. He had a vision for the United States. He pointed to an 1888 novel by Edward Bellamy called Looking Backward, about a socialist America, communist America in the year 2000. No private property, collectivism, everything for the common good. And we all know what politicians and swindlers mean when they say common good. So that's what John Dewey wanted for the United States. He knew this could never be accomplished as long as we were the most educated and the most literate people on earth. And so he set about to reverse that, to dumb down the population. We actually reprinted his outline for how to do that. It was important enough that Sam and I and the publisher all felt we should include it in here. So it's in the appendix. It's an essay that Dewey wrote in 1898 outlining the plan to dumb down America's students. It's called The Primary Education Fetish. And in there he says, hey, why are we worried so much about teaching little kids to read? Let's worry more about social activities and observing and mixing with the world, rather than this incessant focus on reading. And he also noted that we have to do this quietly, we have to do it slowly, change must come gradually, because if the public figures out, there's going to be a violent reaction and it's going to jeopardize the success of our little project here. So he knew that reasonable people would look at this and be horrified. They would say absolutely, positively not. And so that's why it was a quiet process, it was a slow process. And of course he had a lot of help, right? John Dewey didn't act alone. He had millions of dollars from the Rockefellers at his disposal. The Rockefellers had a philanthropy. John D. Rockefeller was the General Education Board. They gave him millions of dollars to set up an experimental school, to promote this kind of nonsense into the teachers' colleges. And by strategically targeting the teachers' colleges, and of course the teachers' colleges were producing the teachers, it became a rather simple matter to take over the public school system. You get your people appointed superintendents and chiefs of education and so on. And so that was basically his plan to take over the schools, and he really succeeded wildly. Rudolf Flesch wrote this in, I think, 1955, and he blew the whistle on it all. I don't know that he understood the true nature and the extent of the conspiracy, but he exposed the fact that children were being prevented from learning how to read properly in the government school system, and he showed what to do about it. Teach children to read the proper way, the way that English has always been taught. We have a phonetic alphabet, so of course you learn that using phonics, not using whole word, where basically you look at a word as if it were a symbol, kind of like a Chinese character, and you associate that with a concept. That's just total quackery when it comes to reading a phonetic alphabet. It doesn't make any sense. And John Dewey was not ignorant of this. The whole word method was known to be quackery. If you go all the way back to the beginning, it was developed by a well-intentioned reverend. He wanted to teach deaf children how to read, and that's wonderful. They couldn't hear sounds, and so he thought maybe if we teach them like this, they can learn to read, and that's wonderful. But they tried it out in the Boston schools on non-deaf children, and it was such a disaster that they yanked it after a few years. It was producing illiteracy and all kinds of horrors, and so they said, okay, we'll take that out. And Horace Mann actually was a big proponent of that, and then finally they yanked it out because it was such a disaster. So when John Dewey came along and started promoting this kind of quackery, he knew exactly what it was going to do. It wasn't a big national accident. It wasn't a well-intentioned mistake. It's clear that he had a deliberate agenda to destroy education in this country. So we also spent a good amount of time talking about behavioral psychology and its role in the schools, and humanism and evolution, and how these all contribute to the problems that we see all around us in society today. I mean, if we look around, we can see that our society is falling apart. Abortions and crimes and riots, and nobody knows about the Constitution. The government's out of control. Really, if you trace it all back, this comes from the government schools. They're getting the kids at young ages, and so they have no idea. They don't know their history. They don't know their culture. They don't know even what they're losing. They don't even know how to read. And so, the root of so much of this goes back to the schools. We talk a little bit about the Department of Education, the disaster that it has been on in terms of proper education in this country and our schools. We do a little bit of background on the run-up to Common Core. Now, one of the things I want to talk about today, I know I'm almost running out of time here, but Common Core, I think, presents us with a huge opportunity to expose all of this. So Common Core has produced a rebellion in this country. I think that it is maybe unprecedented when it comes to the field of education. It doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative or libertarian or socialist or teachers union. Everybody is mad about this, except the establishment, except the politicians. So this is, I think, an unprecedented opportunity for us to blow the lid off all of this. People are mad about Common Core. They need to understand that Common Core was not the beginning. It's certainly not the end. It's part of a longer-term plan. So if we can get people to lift the veil, to look at what's going on here, we have a huge opportunity to really make some serious impact on education. And if we can impact education, impact the minds of the children, we can actually make a big contribution to fixing so many of the problems that we see today in politics and culture and in everything else. So Common Core obviously is a project of the insiders. I don't need to tell you guys that. The evidence is 100% clear. It's not even hidden. Achieve Inc., for example, a shadowy nonprofit that was responsible really for designing the Common Core. This is insiders all over the place, led by Bilderbergers, Council on Foreign Relations members, top to bottom. It's like they're not even bothering to hide it anymore. But just to give you guys a very quick idea of how bad Common Core is, and it's like a smoking gun at this point, they put together a rubber stamp committee. The Common Core people did, the Common Core Validation Committee, and the members of this committee have described it as a rubber stamp committee. It's not my opinion. And presumably they put people on there who they thought would just rubber stamp the standards. They put 2 subject matter experts, and only 2. One of them was Dr. Sandra Stotsky. I've spoken with her. I've interviewed her for some articles and for some other things. And she was the English expert, and she said, no way, these standards are terrible. I'm not signing off on them. You're stripping out all the good literature, all the good reading. You're replacing it with executive orders and EPA regulations. And this is going to reduce the critical thinking skills of children. So I'm not signing off on this. What did they do? They erased her name from the committee. They said, oh, she never existed. If you look on the Common Core's website, she's not there. Then the other expert in mathematics, Dr. James Milgram of Stanford, he also said, I'm not signing off on this monstrosity, the only math expert on this committee. And he said, no, I'm not signing off on this. The standards are poor, they're not clear, and get this, some of them are based on incorrect math. And so, why would you roll out incorrect math standards across the entire country without testing them unless your objective was to dumb down the children? And I submit to you that that is the objective. Again, so this gives us a great opportunity as Birchers, as Americans, to blow the lid off of this whole agenda to dumb down our children. Everybody's upset about Common Core. We just need to get them to see the big picture. It's not about Common Core. It's about an agenda to dumb down our children, and Common Core is just, the latest manifestation of that. We close the book by talking a little bit about UNESCO and where this is all going. People don't realize Common Core is not happening in a vacuum. This is not just a nationalization of education. This is a globalization of education. And again, the evidence is clear. You don't have to speculate, you don't have to theorize, you don't have to assume. It's all there. Bill Gates, the primary financier of Common Core, he put $2 to $6 billion of his own money into this, buying off the think tanks, buying off the unions, buying off the politicians to promote and to develop this Common Core. He signed an agreement with UNESCO in 2004 to develop global education systems and technology and master curriculums and so on and so forth. He signed it on behalf of Microsoft personally. You can get the documents with his signature on it. Now UNESCO, for those of you who don't know the history of it, it was established for the purpose of creating a global society, a global government based on humanism. John Dewey, of course, was one of the original humanists. He signed the first Humanist Manifesto. And just to give you guys an idea of the conflict between the humanist worldview and maybe the Christian worldview, the American worldview, whatever, the very first plank of the Humanist Manifesto, we believe the universe is eternally self-existing. It was not created. What are the first words of the Bible? In the beginning, God created. So right there, right off the bat, they're telling you we're undermining the authority of Scripture with the very first plank of our agenda. And so, of course, UNESCO was led by Julian Huxley, the very first chairman of this. He was a self-declared humanist. He wanted to use humanism to create a global humanist society that would be prepared for a global government. Now, UNESCO, a lot of people don't realize this, but you can go on their website and find these standards. They have what's called a World Core Curriculum, and this was developed quite a while ago. The man who developed them, Under Secretary General Robert Mueller, he was a disciple of Alice Bailey. I don't know how many of you guys know Alice Bailey, but she was hugely influential, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, now called the Lucis Trust. But she wrote a lot of things. She claimed that these spirits, she called them ascended masters, would come into her and dictate to her what she would write. She wrote a book, Education in the New Age, and basically she wanted to promote a single global religion under a single global government. And so the guy who wrote the World Core Curriculum that he said needed to be taught in every school on the planet, he was a disciple of this woman, and he was also very open about his views. He thought the UN was the supreme divine institution that was going to lead humanity towards this wonderful evolution of global government and brotherhood and all this kind of stuff. Now, we recognize this as quackery, but we need to expose all of these things, because I think any reasonable parent, liberal, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, would be very alarmed by these things and would be encouraged to go research a little bit further. And again, this is a huge opportunity for us. Now, UNESCO, speaking of UNESCO, our current education secretary, Arne Duncan, he's a huge fan of UNESCO, and he doesn't hide this at all. He calls UNESCO his global partner in the cradle-to-career education reform agenda. So they're using our tax dollars to promote this lunacy all over the world. UNESCO is doing the same. They have global sexual education guidelines where you teach 5-year-olds. I'm not even going to explain, what they're teaching, because it's just too pornographic for this kind of setting. But they want to start sexualizing the children at 5 and even before, all the way through 18. 2018. Of course, Planned Parenthood is a big champion of the national sexual education standards, and you know, the agenda here is extremely sinister. Also, UNESCO is promoting the Teacher's Guide for teaching reading, and I bet none of you will be surprised to learn that the primary emphasis is on the whole word, the sight method, and then they add the word phonics in there. They say first teach them with the whole word, you teach them to recognize words and memorize words as if they're symbols, and then you can throw in a sprinkling of phonics so that maybe they don't look like total imbeciles when they read a word completely wrong. But so that's what UNESCO is up to. Arnie Duncan says he's creating green global citizens for the green jobs of the coming green sustainable world order. UNESCO says the same, and they're very open about it now. UNESCO is now bragging that when they started their Education for All initiative, there was only 3 countries in the world that had national standards. UNESCO wants every country to have national standards based on their global standards. Now, just a few weeks ago, they released a report saying, hooray, we did such a good job. Now there's more than 100 countries with national education standards and national testing regimes to go with those standards, and surprise, that's what we have here with Common Core and the federally funded Common Core testing regime. So that brings us to the end of the book. Future. Are we going to move toward liberty, educational liberty, proper methods of instruction, local control of schools, private schools, Christian schools, homeschooling, or are we going to move toward global standards, global tyranny? And really that's up to all of us. That's up to, you know, how much work we're willing to put into exposing this and dealing with this. If we do nothing, I'm quite sure that we're going to be moving toward the UNESCO's vision of this. If we all get busy and get the word out and, you know, people understand what's going on here, I think we have a very real chance of fixing it. And again, Sam's work, I think, might be the key to winning here. If people learn how to read, they can educate themselves. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. As long as the government schools are allowed to continue dumbing down the students, to continue making sure that they can't read properly, we can produce all the materials and send all the emails and all the Facebook stuff in the world. It's not going to make any difference. We need children to learn how to read properly, and then we can get about fixing this country. And you know, this is a cheap tool for anybody to use. It doesn't matter if you're 4 years old, it doesn't matter if you're 20. You can teach yourself how to read, or you can work with your children and teach them how to read. So all Americans right now are paying attention to the education system. Common Core is such a disaster. It's new. Everybody is paying attention to what's going on at the schools. Let's expand the discussion. Let's get the discussion beyond the Common Core and show what the real agenda is here. Then we can get to the work of abolishing the Department of Education, you know, reforming or maybe even getting rid of the education model that we have today, and you know, and moving toward an era of educational freedom in which children can use what works and can try out different methods, and we can all be properly educated so that we can save this country and save this republic. Yeah, so if people want a copy of the book, you can, there's again some back there. I have some if those run out, and obviously you can get them through Amazon or whatever. I know Sam and I would both appreciate if you guys enjoy the book, if you would review them on Amazon. Apparently those are really influential. So if you read the book, if you like it, put a note up there so that other people understand that you know, there's valuable information in here. And that's all I have, so thanks very much guys for inviting me.